Christmas Eve in Covina, California, usually arrived gently, the kind of night where porch lights glowed longer than usual and families moved in and out of houses carrying trays of food and wrapped gifts. Laughter drifted across quiet streets, music played behind closed doors. Everything about the evening suggested safety, routine, and tradition. On December 24th, 2008, nothing appeared out of place. Across town, Bruce Pardo sat alone inside his apartment, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of a life recently undone. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. Personal items were half-packed, others already gone. The space no longer felt like a home, just a temporary shelter where time seemed to slow down. His divorce had been finalized only weeks earlier. With it went the life he thought he would keep. Family gatherings, shared holidays, and the sense of belonging he once took for granted. That night, his ex-wife was with her relatives, celebrating without him. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest. Bruce wasn't outwardly emotional. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. Instead, he carried his anger inward, letting it settle quietly, feeding it with thoughts he never challenged. Each one reinforced the same idea. They moved on. I was erased. As the evening deepened, Bruce moved through his apartment deliberately. There was no rush in his actions, no sign of panic. He checked his belongings carefully, as if following a list only he could see. On the bed lay a neatly folded Santa Claus suit, red fabric, white trim, clean and unmistakable. The suit wasn't something he planned to wear right away. It was something he planned to bring with him. He folded it carefully and placed it into a garment bag, zipping it closed with precision. Alongside it, he packed other items without hesitation, each placed where he knew he could reach them later. The preparation felt rehearsed, not impulsive, the product of thoughts that had been circling his mind for far longer than anyone realized. Outside, the air was cold. A neighbor passed by carrying gifts, smiling, wishing him a quick Merry Christmas. Bruce returned the greeting politely. Nothing about him seemed unusual. Nothing hinted at what was unfolding behind his calm expression. He loaded his car and sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. From a nearby house, a Christmas song played faintly through the night. Bruce listened until it faded, then started the engine. The drive through Covina was peaceful. Streets were busy with holiday traffic, families arriving late, headlights gliding past decorated lawns. Bruce blended in easily. He was just another man heading somewhere on Christmas Eve. But inside the car, his thoughts were focused elsewhere. He knew exactly where he was going. He had replayed the route countless times in his head. He pictured the house clearly, the layout, the driveway, the front door. He imagined the people inside, gathered together, unaware of how closely they were connected to his own sense of loss. As he approached the neighborhood, the streets narrowed. Cars lined the curbs. Warm light spilled from windows. Laughter floated into the night air. It was the sound of celebration, the kind Bruce believed had been taken from him. He parked a short distance away and turned off the engine. For a moment, he sat still, listening. His breathing was steady. His face showed no hesitation. Whatever conflict he might have felt had already been resolved long before this night. He stepped out of the car and opened the trunk. Inside lay the garment bag. Bruce lifted it carefully and closed the trunk behind him. Somewhere ahead, a house glowed brighter than the rest, filled with voices, music, and the assumption that Christmas Eve would pass like any other. He adjusted his jacket, glanced down the quiet street, and began walking toward the destination he had already chosen. Behind one front door, a family celebration was underway. And outside, a man carrying a red suit moved closer, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as someone who believed he had been invited all along. Part 2. The Man Behind the Santa Suit. Bruce Pardo stopped beside his car and stood still for a moment, listening to the neighborhood around him. The street was alive in the way only Christmas Eve could make it. Doors opening and closing, distant laughter, music leaking softly through walls. Nothing in the air suggested danger. Everything suggested welcome. He opened the trunk and lifted out the garment bag. Standing in the shadow of a parked car, Bruce unzipped it carefully. Inside lay the Santa suit, folded neatly, bright red into darkness. He touched the fabric briefly, then began to dress, not hurried, not nervous, but steady, as though following steps he had already walked through in his mind. The pants first, Then the jacket, pulled snug around his shoulders. The belt tightened firmly at his waist. Each piece changed him a little more, stripping away the man who had driven here and replacing him with something else, something familiar, comforting, disarming. When he lifted the white beard and secured it over his features vanished completely. The anger, the resentment, the quiet bitterness, all hidden behind curls of synthetic hair. The suit didn't just disguise him, it gave him permission. It allowed him to step into a role no one would question. Bruce picked up the Santa hat last, turning it slowly in his hands before placing it on his head. He adjusted it until it sat just right, then looked down at himself. The transformation was complete. Anyone who saw him now wouldn't see Bruce Pardo. They would see Santa Claus. Harmless, expected, welcome. A symbol that belonged inside a home on Christmas Eve. He closed the trunk and stepped away from the car. As he began walking toward the house, someone across the street noticed him and smiled. A woman laughed, nudging the person beside her, assuming this was part of the evening's fun. Bruce lifted a hand in a small wave, playing the role without effort. No one questioned why Santa was there. No one asked where he came from. That was the power of the suit. The house stood ahead, glowing brighter than the rest, warm light spilling from the windows. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Voices overlapped inside. Adults talking, music playing, the unmistakable sound of family gathered together. Bruce slowed as he reached the front steps. For a moment he stood there, listening. He could hear laughter clearly now. Someone said a name. Someone else laughed too loudly. Plates clinked. A Christmas song played faintly in the background. Everything he believed he had lost lived behind that door. He raised his hand and knocked. Footsteps approached almost immediately. The door opened, and for a brief second confusion flickered across the faces inside, followed by smiles, laughter, surprise. Someone gasped. "Santa!" The reaction was instant and unguarded. Adults laughed at the unexpected sight. Children leaned forward, eyes wide. The room shifted to make space for him without hesitation. Bruce stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, the heat of the house, the closeness of bodies, the smell of food and pine and candle wax. Christmas decorations filled the space. Lights wrapped around railings, ornaments hanging from the tree, gifts stacked neatly nearby. No one backed away. No one hesitated. Someone reached out to touch the white beard, laughing. Another voice called out to the rest of the house that Santa had arrived. The moment stretched, suspended in disbelief and amusement, as if this was a harmless surprise meant to be enjoyed. Bruce said nothing. He simply moved forward, deeper into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. And as it closed, sealing the warmth and noise inside, the last barrier between celebration and reality disappeared, unnoticed by everyone except the man standing in the Santa suit. Part 3. The First Act of Violence. For a few seconds, the room stayed light. Laughter lingered in the air, carried by the warmth of Christmas music humming softly from a nearby speaker. Someone clapped at the sight of Santa. A child smiled up at the man in red, eyes wide with excitement, expecting a joke, a gift, something magical. Bruce stood still in the center of the room, letting the moment stretch just long enough for everyone to relax completely. No one sensed danger. They saw a costume. They saw tradition. They saw family. They did not see the man underneath. Bruce let the silence settle, watching faces glow with comfort, watching the last trace of suspicion disappear. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. He had rehearsed this moment too many times in his head for nerves to matter now. Then he moved. The change was immediate and jarring. Not loud at first, just fast. A sudden shift in posture. A stiffness that didn't belong in a holiday performance. Before anyone could register confusion, his hand slipped beneath the red fabric of the Santa suit. When the gun appeared, the illusion shattered. Smiles froze in place. Laughter died mid-breath. The room seemed to hold its air, as if everyone had collectively forgotten how to inhale. Someone laughed nervously, unsure whether this was a tasteless joke. Another person took a half step back. Then Bruce pulled the trigger. The sound exploded through the house, sharp, violent, impossible, cutting through the Christmas music still playing faintly in the background. The joy of the moment collapsed instantly, replaced by screaming and disbelief. Panic erupted in waves as people realized this was real. Someone shouted. Someone screamed a name. Someone dropped to the floor. Bruce didn't hesitate. He fired again, advancing into the room with steady steps. The weapon barked as family members scattered in blind terror, chairs scraping loudly against the floor, bodies colliding as they ran without direction. Decorations were knocked over, glass shattered. What had been a celebration seconds earlier became a scene of chaos and desperation. People crawled, people ran, people fell. The Santa suit moved through the room like a grotesque parody. Red fabric and white trim drifting through smoke and panic, a holiday symbol turned into something monstrous. Children cried as adults shouted for them to get down, to hide, to run. The space filled with fear, so thick it felt suffocating. Bruce kept moving. He fired again, his expression hidden behind the fake beard and glasses. He did not shout. He did not curse. He said nothing at all. The silence from him made the violence feel colder, more deliberate. Then, suddenly, the gun stopped. A hollow click. For a fraction of a second, the room seemed to freeze again. Hope surged where terror had been. Someone realized the weapon had failed. Someone else dared to move forward, instinctively sensing a chance, a brief, fragile opening. But Bruce did not panic. He stepped back calmly, as if the jam were not a failure but a transition. He didn't struggle with the gun. He didn't rush. His movements were controlled, measured, rehearsed. He reached beneath the Santa suit again. This time, not for the handgun. As he revealed what came next, any remaining hope drained from the room. The realization hit all at once, that this was not a sudden outburst, not a loss of control, not a crime of passion. This was planned. Every step, every second, every terror-filled scream, Bruce had come prepared to continue, no matter what went wrong. And as fear surged again, deeper and heavier than before, it became painfully clear that the nightmare was only beginning. The party had crossed a line it could never return from, and the house, once filled with laughter, now stood on the edge of something far worse. Part 4. Fire and Destruction. The flamethrower roared to life. The sound was deep and mechanical, nothing like the sharp crack of gunfire. It filled the room with a low, violent force that seemed to shake the walls themselves. In an instant, flames poured forward, unnatural, blinding, and overwhelming, surging across the space faster than fear could react. Heat slammed into the room. People screamed as fire swallowed the air around them, driving them out of corners and hiding places they had believed were safe. The warmth of the house turned hostile in seconds, becoming something punishing and inescapable. Decorations ignited almost immediately. Wrapping paper curled and vanished. Garlands disappeared in flashes of light. Then the Christmas tree caught fire. The flames raced upward, devouring the branches as ornaments shattered and lights popped like gunshots, exploding one after another. What had stood at the center of the celebration, glowing, familiar, comforting, became a towering column of fire, casting wild shadows across the walls. Smoke followed instantly. It poured through the house in thick black waves, filling lungs and blinding eyes. Breathing became painful. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. People stumbled blindly, coughing violently, hands stretched out in desperation, trying to feel their way toward exits they could no longer see. Bruce moved through it all without urgency. He advanced steadily, guiding the stream of fire with controlled movements, turning room after room into an inferno. Walls darkened and cracked. Furniture collapsed as heat weakened its frame. The house groaned under the stress, wood popping and snapping as flames ate through it. The fire didn't chase people, it hurted them. Those who tried to flee through hallways were driven back by waves of heat. Others smashed windows, desperate for air, only to be met with smoke and flame pouring outward. Some fell, some crawled, some cried out for help that never came. The Santa suit moved through the destruction like a cruel mockery, red fabric glowing in the firelight, white trim stained dark by smoke. The figure beneath it remained methodical, detached, as if executing a task rather than unleashing horror. The house transformed completely. Rooms that had held conversations, laughter, and family memories were erased in minutes. Photos burned. Furniture vanished. The walls themselves seemed to bend and surrender. What had taken decades to build was being consumed in moments. The fire did not discriminate. It swallowed everything. Outside, the night began to change. At first, neighbors thought the noise was part of the celebration. Fireworks, perhaps, or a television turned up too loud. Then the smell reached them. Thick, acrid smoke drifting through the air. Someone stepped outside and looked toward the house. Flames were shooting from the windows. Screams cut through the quiet suburban street, sharp and unmistakable. Panic spread quickly as people realized this was no accident. Phones were pulled out, emergency numbers were dialed, voices trembled as callers struggled to explain what they were seeing. By the time sirens echoed in the distance, the house was already beyond saving. Fire consumed it from the inside out, collapsing floors and ceilings as smoke billowed into the sky. The glow lit up the neighborhood, an orange warning that something unspeakable had happened inside. And as the chaos drew attention outward, Bruce Pardo was already moving away. He stepped out into the night, leaving the burning house behind him. The flames reflected briefly off the Santa suit before disappearing into the darkness. Behind him, the fire continued its work, erasing the last traces of what had once been a family gathering. The destruction was complete, and the man who had brought it had not stayed to watch. Part 5. Escape and Death. Bruce stepped back into the cold night, leaving heat and chaos behind him. The air outside felt sharp against his skin, a sudden contrast to the inferno consuming the house. Behind him, flames clawed into the sky, lighting up the neighborhood in violent pulses of orange and red. Smoke rolled upward, thick and suffocating, carrying the screams and destruction with it. He didn't look back. Still dressed as Santa, Bruce walked calmly away from the scene, moving through the confusion untouched. Neighbors were spilling out of their homes now, some frozen in disbelief, others shouting into phones, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. For a few precious moments, no one noticed him. He reached his car, opened the door, and slipped inside. The engine started without hesitation. As he pulled away, the burning house disappeared behind him, replaced by flashing lights and chaos that no longer concerned him. Police and firefighters converged on the street, their focus locked entirely on the inferno. The priority was rescue, containment, survival. No one realized that the man responsible was already driving away, blending back into the darkness of the city. Bruce drove steadily, methodically, as if following a route he had already memorized. The adrenaline that had carried him through the attack began to fade, replaced by exhaustion and clarity. The Santa suit, once a shield, now felt heavy and suffocating. The illusion was over. He headed toward his brother's house. The drive passed in near silence. Street lights blurred past the windshield. The radio stayed off. There was no panic, no frantic movement, no attempt to flee the city. He had never intended to disappear. When he arrived, the neighborhood was quiet, untouched by what had just occurred miles away. He parked the car and sat still for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slow and controlled. Inside the car, he removed the Santa suit. The red fabric was folded carefully, deliberately, as if it were no longer a weapon, but simply an object that had served its purpose. The beard came off. The hat was set aside. The disguise that had granted him access, trust, and time was finished. Bruce armed himself again. He knew the police would come. He knew there was no path forward beyond this moment. There would be no escape, no explanation, no negotiation. The night had already reached its end. When officers arrived, they approached cautiously, weapons drawn, commands shouted into the darkness. Bruce did not run. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He stood his ground. A single gunshot shattered the quiet. By the time officers reached him, Bruce Pardo was already dead. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic arrest, no opportunity for answers. The man behind the Santa suit would never stand trial. He would never explain what drove him. He would never hear the names of the people he had destroyed spoken aloud in court. The story ended there, abruptly, violently, and without closure. But the night itself was far from over. Back at the house, firefighters battled the flames, searching through smoke and rubble for survivors. The scale of the tragedy was only beginning to emerge. What had started as a family gathering had ended as one of the most horrific crimes in recent memory. For those left behind, there would be no explanation to cling to. Only grief, only questions, only the unbearable weight of what had been lost in a matter of minutes. If you're hearing this story for the first time, this is often where the headlines stop: the crime, the fire, the death of the attacker. But the true impact of that night didn't end with Bruce Pardo's final moment. It spread outward, into families, into a community, into a country forced to confront the reality of what had happened on a night meant for peace and celebration. And if you want more carefully told true crime stories like this is the moment to subscribe to Evidence with Ink, because what comes next matters just as much as what happened in the flame.